The June 22nd, 2023 Temple Terrace Board of Adjustment meeting is now called to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. We'll now take the roll call. Members, please state your name for the record. Beginning to my right. And your speaker is off, I think, or is it maybe?
Eric Kravitz.
I'm Byron Longworth.
Stephanie Young.
Tony Anderson.
The next question I have for the city attorney is if we have 1, 2, 3, 4 of us, do we have a quorum to proceed?
Yes, the quorum for the Board of Adjustment is 4. Therefore, in order to, for the applicant to obtain their request, they would have to get 3 votes out of the 4 that are there. It's up to them tonight whether that is acceptable to them. If not, then we would come back at another time when you'd have a better chance because there would be 5 people. So if you wish to proceed, you need to let us know, right? I'm seeing heads nodding, but nobody talking, so. Okay, yes.
Next, as to approval of previous minutes, have all the board members received the minutes from the February 23rd, 2023, March 23rd, 2023, and April 27th, 2023 meetings? Are there any corrections or additions to these minutes? And do we have copies of these for us?
They were emailed to us.
Okay, I didn't know we were supposed to print these. All right. Does anybody want to take? Do you want a copy to take a look at? Anybody?
You mentioned 3 different dates.
Yeah, I thought we approved the 20 February and March ones. So we're only actually talking about April because technically those are the only ones that we haven't.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the April ones, does everyone approve? Any
Yes.
changes? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for the April 27th meeting?
So moved.
Motion to approve the April 27th, 2023 meeting minutes.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All right, the meeting minutes are approved. Motion passed, the meeting minutes are approved. All right, I'll briefly explain the board adjustment procedures for tonight's meeting. Please listen, and if anyone wishes to speak on any of the matters discussed tonight has questions, please ask after I finish explaining the procedures. Each variance request will be heard separately, and the board may approve with conditions or deny the requested variance tonight. Alternatively, the board may continue a case to a specified date upon the request of the owner applicant. A staff report detailing the variance request and staff's recommendation will be presented to the board by Community Development Director Michael Sherman. The board may then ask questions of staff. The applicant will present their application and answer any questions from the board. Next, the board will hear the other persons wishing to speak on the application. Comments should be limited to relevant factors. The applicant will be allowed to respond to the comments from the public. The board will then close the public hearing for discussion on the petition. Upon no further discussion by the board, the chair will ask for the motion. The motion must state the reasons for granting or denying the application. Staff will provide written correspondence to the applicant and owners after this meeting regarding the approval or denial of the application. If approved, the owner may submit the appropriate building permit applications, or city may proceed with reviewing the building permit applications that may already have been filed as a result of the board approval of the variance. However, please note that any action by this board is not final for 30 days, and if the applicant moves forward prior to the expiration of the 30 days, they do so at their own risk. All right, after all that boring information, does anyone have any questions? Okay. If not, then all persons wishing to speak or heard on the variance petitions, please stand to take the oath and be sworn. This is anybody who is going to speak either petition or someone from the community who's going to speak on their behalf.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony or evidence you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right. So the next part is for ex parte communication.
Oh, I'll ask the question.
Okay, it says the city attorney will ask.
If any member of the board has had an ex parte communication with regard to this matter, it is now the time to state what that is. If you had received anything in writing from anyone with regard to this matter, please provide a copy of that writing to the clerk for the record. And whether it was oral or in writing, if you've had any ex parte communication, please state what that is now, with whom you had it, what the sum and substance of it was, and when this occurred. And I'll start with Mr. Kravitz.
I have not had any.
I have not.
I have not.
Thank you.
Okay. So the public hearing for continued variance request BA 2302, the Temple Terrace Board of Adjustment will now open the public hearing on the variance, that variance for 119 Glen Arven Avenue as submitted by Florida College property owner and applicant. So we'll begin with the staff presentation by Michael Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board. Tonight we have a variance request from Florida College, and the applicants tonight are requesting that the Board of Adjustment consider their application BA 23-02 for the grant of a variance from Section 12-655, Standards for and Protection of Environmentally Sensitive Lands, contained in the Temple Terrace Land Development Code. The applicant's request tonight is for the granting of a variance from the Standards 12-665, Standards for and Protection of Environmentally Sensitive Lands contained in the Temple Terrace LDC. A variance is requested to allow an 8-foot setback for the reconstruction of an outdoor amphitheater in lieu of the required 200-foot setback from the Hillsborough River and the 50-foot setback from jurisdictional wetland boundaries, pursuant to the Temple Terrace Land Development Code, Section 12-655, Standards for and Protection of Environmentally Sensitive Lands. So the sections that they're trying to get the variance from is 12-655E1B and 12-655E1C. Section B of the Land Development Code restricts the placement of structures within the established jurisdictional wetland in Hillsborough River, reading no buildings shall be located closer than 50 feet from the landward boundary of the established jurisdictional wetlands or 200 feet from the river, whichever is greater. And subsection C says the Land Development Code restricts the placement of impervious surfaces within the established jurisdictional wetlands or Hillsborough River, reading no impervious surface shall be located closer than 50 feet from the landward boundary of the established jurisdictional wetlands or 200 feet from the river, which is ever greater. So the applicant's proposal tonight envisions four things. One is, as part of the variance request, this proposal will reduce the overall impact of impervious surfaces, and this will be accomplished by removing much of the concrete, which currently serves as the aisles, and be replaced with pervious turf. In addition, synthetic turf will be added on the outside to provide ground seating, reducing actual seating that requires benches. This request will reduce negative environmental impacts to the Hillsborough River and in jurisdictional wetlands. The proposal will be to construct a new stage, an amphitheater. The current stage overhangs the river, and the proposed stage will be pulled back approximately 8 feet from the jurisdictional wetlands in the Hillsborough River and be located entirely on the Florida College property. The proposed stage will also include a shade structure. The proposal will also provide ADA access, and sidewalks will be added throughout the site to provide this access to the seating and stage areas. The location of the property is 119 Glen Arven Avenue. The current zoning is educational institutional. The future land use is public, semi-public, and the property is approximately 17 acres. The map that you see shows the subject site, which is Florida College's campus. This slide here shows the proposed amphitheater, and the line in orange is the 50-foot setback line from wetlands. So, upon analysis and background information, staff finds that the request meets the hardship criteria established in Section 12-72C3 of the City of Terrace LDC, and therefore staff recommends that the Board of Adjustment approve the request of an 8-foot setback from the jurisdictional wetlands in the Hillsborough River contained in the Variance Application 23-02 to permit the reconstruction of the amphitheater with a reduced setback of 8 feet from the jurisdictional wetlands from the Hillsborough River and jurisdictional wetlands in the Hillsborough River, as shown on the submitted plan. So these are the criteria that need to be considered. The first one is there are extraordinary or exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property because of its size, shape, or topography. This subject property complies with the lot, area, and dimensional requirements, but the location of the use of the adjacent to wetlands in the Hillsborough River prevents the placement of the structure in compliance with setback requirements of the Land Development Code. The site proposed for the requested variance is surrounded by existing development, natural features, and infrastructure, including parking lots, educational buildings, roadways, adjacent trees, tree canopy, and student housing. The landlocked nature of the urban campus with the surrounding infrastructure, existing buildings, development, and environmentally sensitive features creates extraordinary conditions that are particular to the subject property. Number two, the application of the provisions of the LDC to the particular property creates unnecessary hardship. So there's little ability within this urban campus to relocate the amphitheater outside that 200-foot river setback or the 50-foot jurisdictional wetland setback or to other areas on campus. The relocation of the amphitheater outside these setbacks creates a hardship by requiring the removal of trees, sidewalks, buildings, parking areas, and existing infrastructure that currently serves the college. Relocation of the amphitheater outside these setback areas will create an unnecessary hardship of the college. Such conditions, number three, are peculiar conditions that apply to this particular piece of property because of its size, shape, and topography. The amphitheater has existed prior to our land development regulations and is currently a legal non-conforming use with a 0 setback from the Hillsborough River and wetlands. Since the amphitheater and Florida College have existed prior to present-day setback criteria, the project poses an unusual situation which is particular to this property, as meeting the setback would require removal of parking lots, educational buildings, roadways, adjacent trees and tree canopy, and student housing. Number four, relief, if granted, will not cause substantial detriment to the public good or impair the purposes of the Land Development Code. Reconstruction of and granting the variance will not cause substantial detriment to the public good or impair the purposes and intent of the Land Development Code. In fact, if relief is granted, the variance will reduce the environmental impacts to the Hillsborough River and jurisdictional wetlands. Number five, variances shall not be granted for use of land or building or structure which is not otherwise permitted by the Land Development Code. The zoning district permits outdoor recreation facilities as part of educational facilities. So it is a use that is allowed by the zoning district. Number six, any variance granted shall be the minimum variance which makes possible the reasonable use of the land. And staff believes that this request is a minimum variance of 8 feet to make reasonable uses of the land and without having to remove the infrastructure, the classroom space, student housing, trees canopy, tree cover, and other infrastructure. Number 7, the special conditions and circumstances do not result from the actions of the applicant. The special conditions are keeping the stage, seating, and infrastructure, and protected trees in the same place without removal will allow the college to maintain the existing conditions since 1958. Number 8, granting the variance will not confer on the applicant any special privileges that's denied by the chapter to other land structures or buildings in the same district or neighborhood. Granting of the variance will not confer special privileges upon the applicant, and I think this part is important, but as noted by the applicant, Florida College is a lone educational campus along the river. No property shares the same space demands or space requirements as the college. Compelling the Florida College to move the existing infrastructure out of the setback would create a hardship unique to this property. Relocating the amphitheater outside the setback limits will create a hardship since the college has limited vacant areas for new buildings and projects, as most of the campus is already occupied with different types of construction and features such as building, parking lots, recreational areas, etc. And therefore, granting the variance will not confer on the applicant any special privilege that is denied by this chapter to other land structures or buildings in the same district or neighborhood. And number 9, allowing the variance will result in substantial justice being done, considering both the public benefits intended to be secured by the LDC and the hardship that will be suffered due to denial. Allowing the variance will result in substantial justice, as it will allow the college to continue operating its amphitheater, and it reduces the environmental impacts associated with the current amphitheater hanging out over into the river. And that is my presentation, and if the Board of Adjustment members have any questions, I will attempt to answer them.
Okay, thank you. I know that I'm going to have some, but do you guys have any questions for him? Okay. I have one. What is pervious turf?
So pervious turf is a type of turf that allows water to drain through it as opposed to an impervious surface, which is like the table or concrete or something like that.
You know what the proposal, like what this impervious turf is made out of?
No, but there are pervious surfaces that are, are like, they look like grass. They're used on football fields and other other sporting type fields where, in lieu of regular grass.
And as for the synthetic parts of it, will that be impervious as well, or?
So what the college has told me, as much as they can, they want to construct the facility out of pervious materials, and that will reduce stormwater requirements, but also it will reduce impacts on the wetlands as well as the jurisdictional river, because it'll drain into the ground as opposed to sheet flow into the river itself.
Okay. All right, maybe they'll be able to tell me about which material specifically they're looking into, because that's what I'm kind of curious about, if we're using that as grounds for supplementing the two. So I just have another question is, so is the variance now only an 8-foot variance is all that they're asking for?
They want to pull, yes, sir. They want to pull it back 8 feet as opposed to 0 foot as it is right now, and with it overhanging into the river.
Okay, so as currently,
No, I think the question is, what is the requirement? What is the required setback, and what are they asking for?
Yes, ma'am. The required setback from jurisdictional wetlands is 50 feet, and for the river itself is 200 feet. They're requesting for an 8-foot setback adjacent to the river and the wetlands, which would give a 192 feet would be, if you take that 8 feet off, or 42 feet from the wetlands is what this is the difference. But the request is 8 foot from the wetlands and 8 foot from the river.
8 foot from the river, so they normally, if I understand correctly, they normally have to be 50 feet from the river, and now they're going to be 8 feet from the river.
Normally, they would be 50 feet from wetlands.
Yeah.
And 200 feet from the river itself.
Okay, so this is really going directly right over the wetlands?
This will be pulled back approximately 8 feet. Whereas right now, it's right adjacent to the wetlands and the stage itself overhangs into the.
No, I understand that part. I'm just, so the specific request for number of feet saw in this variance is how many feet?
They're requesting an 8-foot setback, so it will be 192 feet from the river it'll be 8 feet from the river.
Okay, but the number that would go into the variance is 192 feet to move it.
And 42 feet from the wetlands.
Okay. All right, thank you for clarifying.
I had that in my staff report, but it just seemed relatively confusing, so I pulled those numbers out.
Okay. Yeah, I was used to getting copies of those, so I glossed through to my computer, but I don't have a copy in front of me. Okay, all right. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
I do have one question. When I'm looking at, for example, attachment D, there's parking, and then I think also a building directly, that would be south of the amphitheater. And it looks to me like those are probably also within the 200 feet from the river. So I guess what I'm thinking is this something we'll see again soon? If this is granted, if there's an issue with the parking or with any of these buildings, are we going to perhaps also end up having a variance issued for repair of the parking, or do you see any
The
risk
existing structures, if they
that?
need to be repaired, will not be before the Board of Adjustment. There are other buildings and parking and structures within those 200-foot setbacks and 50 feet right now.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right, so all right, so next is the applicant's presentation.
I'm not clicking. You can do that? Okay. All right. I'm John Weaver. I'm the president of Florida College. I just want to quickly express my gratitude to the board for considering this variance. I want to express to you our affection for the city. My family goes back into the 1940s here in Temple Terrace. I'm a resident of the city. I oftentimes am kayaking on the river every weekend, a great appreciation for the Hillsborough River and what it means. Back in the 90s, I attended Florida College, as did my wife, and some of my children are now. And back in that day, we were participants in events that were on the river there on the amphitheater. And I just wanted to share with you just very briefly that amphitheater has been part of the culture of the college and the city for a long time. We, of course, have student events there that are regularly held, but it's also a space for community events, for schools in the area that would come and learn about the river, but also have performances on the banks of the Hillsborough. So I just wanted to express our love for the fact that that's a community space as well as a college space. And we respect very much the symbiotic nature that we have with the river and want to be attentive to the environmental needs of the wetlands and of the river going forward. There's great respect for the fact that we are stewards of that space as one of the few commercial spaces along the river in Temple Terrace. And so I want to affirm that. I want to affirm the belief that we come to you with today that we do need a variance, that there is not another space on the campus that could possibly hold this amphitheater in the way that we use it. And so we have built out intentionally the space, and so this is the best spot for that amphitheater going forward. And just also the hope, which I've expressed to the city manager, I want to convey to you, that we have a wonderful relationship with the city, and that the space of the college is viewed as a community space, a city space where citizens are able to use the riverfront and come and visit. There's an increasing trend in higher education to build walled cities around colleges, to build walls and gates so that the city can't get into the college. We have expressed expressly stated that we don't want that, even though we've had donors concerned about security who have said, can we wall off the college from the city? And I've said, no, we want to be a space that's pervious, that can bring citizens into the city, into the college, into the riverfront to be able to use. And I hope that increases over time, and that we can find ways that citizens can enjoy the river, and we have more events down there in ways that is respectful of the wetlands, the environmental needs of the river, but really realizes what a wonderful space we have for Temple Terrace to be able to use all together. And so this request is for us to be able to restore an amphitheater which has been used for decades, both for the college and for the community, and we'll be attentive to your concerns as we present that today. Thanks for your time. Grateful for that.
Good evening. I'm Clayton Bricklemeyer with the firm of Ward Henderson, 101 East Kennedy Boulevard. I want to thank Dr. Weaver for coming and thank Mr. Sherman for his presentation. I watched the previous hearing, and it seemed to have boiled down to what the hardship is, and I'm going to bring up Tim Manis in a second to really kind of flesh out. But what he's fleshing out is we have a necessary facility that cannot be located other than within these areas, and that's really the whole thing. We have a necessary facility that has to be here. It can't go anywhere else. And not only that, but we are providing, and I'll jump ahead to the pervious, impervious, effectively everything is pervious except for the part that your butt sits on. It's basically a bunch of benches is what this comes out to. And the rest of it is going to act pervious. So bearing that in mind, I'm going to have Mr. Manis is going to run through his slideshow, and it's going to explain topography, mature trees, and the other reasons that this needs to be where it is and why that is the hardship we are suffering. So, Tim, hopefully you can click.
Good evening, Board. Thank you. My name's Tim Manis with the firm of Durkin Edson LLC. We've been consulting for a number of years with Florida College, and I hope to provide some background on the amphitheater. We're also consulting with DRMP on the project itself. Can I see your screen so I know what they're seeing? Are they seeing that? Or oh, it's going to be up there. Okay, sorry. So this is my thing here. Okay. Dr. Weaver has done a great job of setting this up, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on things you've already heard. I'd like to move fairly quickly into the physicality, if you will, of the amphitheater itself and what we're planning to do. It's already been stated that this facility is really up on the river itself almost. The stage kind of overhangs the river. And it should be noted that the wetlands on this side of the river are really very tight to the riverbank. They're almost concurrent. Of course, on the other side of the riverbank, they go on for a quarter of a mile. But this is the steeper bank, and that's what makes it an amphitheater. You know, we often talk about natural amphitheaters, almost as landforms rather than spaces. And that's what this is for Florida College. One question the board asked previously is, can this be rebuilt? And you know, that was a good question. So we went back and talked to our contractor, Burgess Civil, and asked them to take a look at this. And they determined that with some effort, it probably could be rebuilt as it is now. Not that we really want to do that. We'd like to improve it, and we've said the ways in which we would like to improve it. So just a bit of background for you. We have previously shown some inspirational images from University of Florida, and this mainly is to indicate that there are terraces that are about seating height with a turf surface in between. In our case, a synthetic turf surface. By the way, very common use on athletic fields. And we're doing one right now in Pennsylvania, and we're going to require that it, for that field, that it absorb 15 inches of water per hour, because that's the whole point of them, is they have to put the water back in the soil. So just as a little bit of information. That's seen in this next slide with the turf surface on the right. That's Florida College's activity zone, a project which we worked with them on a couple of years ago. That's the volleyball court. And in the, the law of unintended consequences, the students now love that it's a seating area because there's no ants on the artificial turf, evidently. So they like that, and so we came up with the idea of doing the same on the amphitheater. I would also point out that the shade structures on the left, which cover the basketball courts in this case, would be the same idea that we would propose over the stage at the amphitheater. It's a pervious material. It's really just 4 posts and some framing with the gray cloth that protects from the sun, and of course that's very important down here. A bit of information that's very timely. We are working with the college right now on some planning ideas, and one of the things we do is engage the student body. We like to throw some campus plans down and have them come through the student center and give them 3 red dots and 3 green dots and say, what do you like and what don't you like? What do we need to work on this campus? And I would point out 2 things about this particular slide. One, you see all the green dots on the campus quad in the middle of the photograph, the green space, the open space. I know there's some questions about that space. And you see all the red dots, save one, on the amphitheater. And that really was, we want it back. We love the space. Why can't we get that thing going? And that was the green dot. We love the space. It's seen, obviously, by the students as something that is in need of repair. And then I do want to emphasize this particular slide. I think this answers some of the questions or the debate that was happening earlier. On this particular image on the left is the existing amphitheater, which consists of 1,925 square feet of impervious concrete, and on the right, the proposed renovation, which would be 450 square feet of really wall tops. If you've seen those segmental block walls that they build, kind of the Legos, if you will, that's what we're proposing here. And so it'll be terraces going up the hill, and then with the synthetic turf on either side of that. So it truly is reducing the amount of impervious by a very large amount. And then the stage and the accessible walkway to the stage would be boardwalk, which is something that's allowed in the wetland areas. It's Lettuce Lake Park, places like that. And that really plays into this next bit of information, just for your information. This is a project that's actually we've been working on for quite some time. This chart represents a series of meetings that occurred last year with various agencies, including the city, to really just throw this project out and say, what do you think? What will we need to do to make this happen? And our takeaway from this, it kind of developed as we went, was that if we approach the project in a way that is, if I could just say it, environmentally friendly, less impervious material, things like that, that the agencies would look on it much more favorably. And so you see Florida Department of Environmental Protection, possibility of no permit required, since everything would be landward of the wetland line. The county deferred to the city. The County Environmental Protection Commission, minor work permit, and on down. So I will tell you that during that process, one of the things they told us, again, was that if you back up a little bit from that wetland line, we would probably give you a more positive feedback on the project. So we did. We pulled it back. We wanted to get away from that line. We understand the issues there, so we wanted to do that and make the project of less impact in that area. So the project itself is located within the setback, not the wetland, the setback, and that should be made clear. All right, well, what about site restrictions then? I'd like to talk about really 4 things. From a planning perspective, from a setback or perspective, I'd like to talk a little bit about the quad, the existing trees, and that's about it. From a planning perspective, a campus planning perspective, I would just say that campus buildings and facilities, parking and so forth, are all arranged in a fitting way where appropriate for vehicular and emergency access, connection to utilities, move in, move out, and adjacencies to one another. And what I mean simply is this: not all campus uses are created equal. You need to have emergency vehicle access to dorms. You don't necessarily need that to an amphitheater. You want the access to deliveries from, let's just say, the library to be near the street where that can happen. The amphitheater is a more isolated use. It's the use where you want it to be quiet. So from a campus planning perspective, all uses are not created equal, and they really fit where they should be fit. That's the whole purpose of what our firm does, which is campus planning, trying to put the right uses in the right places on a campus. And so that's one thing to think about, and that relates to some questions that were asked about the campus quad, that green space that you see driving or walking by the campus. And this bit of information helps us to see that even though that is an open space, it's not an empty space. Far from it. It's a programmed space, and it's really the only space of its kind on this parcel where the campus can gather, where they can celebrate, where they can have activities. And you see on the left a list of those activities: job fairs, future student activities, celebrations when the basketball team wins a tournament, something like that. And just having that flat space on a campus is a very valuable thing. And the next two slides really indicate kind of some things that happen there. And this was just a few of the photographs that we asked the question, how much do you do out there, Florida College? And we were interested to see just how much does happen in that space. So that's a very valuable space for the college. And for us, at least as campus planners, the idea of building up there or digging a hole there seems kind of counterproductive and not the best use of what that ought to be. And also, it's in a noisier part of the campus. When you're doing a cello concerto, which I'm sure they do over there, you don't want the kid in the pickup truck with the loud diesel exhaust stacks driving by. He'll probably still do it anyway. Oops, I'm going way too fast here. Sorry, okay. Site restrictions also in regard to setbacks. Florida College, yes indeed, does have a 17-acre campus. However, when you count the setbacks that have been reviewed with you tonight, that really takes it down to a 10-acre campus. 7 full acres of land along the river are impacted by setbacks. So there's no doubt that there's no place else along the river that would be suitable for the amphitheater. And when you look at the rest of the campus, you go up on this slide, that big kind of brown line going through there, that's a public sanitary easement going through campus, 20 feet wide. And you might not be able to see it very well, but kind of right in the middle of campus is one of the city's wells with, to the best we can figure, a line with a public easement going out to Glen, Arven. So there are a number of restrictions that not only kind of tie us down in terms of where the amphitheater could go, but where everything else can go too. So it's not as easy as just saying, well, that's an open space. It's there's a lot of impacts there moving forward with all the setbacks that are laid over on this campus, certainly restricting the ability to do things that we need to do. Another question that was asked, great question, is what about the existing trees? I'm a landscape architect. I love to advance trees on a campus. Trees make the campus. And so
I apologize. We're out of time. Do we have since they're the only one here tonight, do we have a motion to grant them a continuance?
Sorry, what?
Their presentation, the time ran out. Since they're the only one here, do we have a motion to grant them a
I'll
continuance?
motion to extend the time.
How long do you need?
I'm almost done, I promise.
All right, for a 5-minute continuance?
Let's
How about-
10 minutes.
Do I have a second? All right.
Save your
Alice-
sermon, preacher, right?
Sorry, I gotta do this. This is a formality thing here. I gotta do it.
Understand. We have a lot of existing trees. We did a tree survey to show what they are, and this tree cover was accurately shown with the tree canopy sizes. We don't want to tear down trees for something that should be a park-like facility, and we're trying to avoid that. Finally, let me talk about topography for a moment. As I mentioned, amphitheater is often used to describe a landform. Within the first, let's see, I have it on here. The slope along the river is 15 feet of height over 91 feet of distance. That's 6 to 1. 6 run to 1 high. The slope along the quad is 15 feet and 352 feet, or 23 to 1. That's fairly flat. No other portion of the campus is as isolated as the existing site. No other portion slopes like this portion does. And you can see, you've already seen the existing plan. Let me get to this. This is the plan over top, or the section over top of the plan. The reason the amphitheater was built here to begin with, the reason we want to keep it here is because it's a light touch to lay an amphitheater into that slope. Moving it to a flat site would require an enormous amount of inputs to either bring equipment in and dig a hole or bring equipment in and build up to make something that's used. It's important, but it's certainly not used like a flat piece of ground is for the recreation and so forth that happens there. You've already seen all of these images, so I won't spend any time on my 5 more minutes with that. And I will just leave you with this image that kind of gives you the whole scene, walking down into the amphitheater, and questions. Did I say that?
Could you just go back to can we go back to the picture where you have the benches with the grass so I can see that? There's like 2 before. That's one, yeah.
Yes.
All right. Is the I got it. All right. Is the anyone left for your presentation?
I was just going to wrap up.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm open to questions. Clayton Bricklemeyer again. Thanks, Tim. I hope that was illustrative and helpful. I wanted to focus just really briefly on the substantial justice, the 9th factor in this deal. The regulations, the point of these regulations is to avoid runoff and is to keep that riverbank pervious, which we are doing, and still able to locate this facility. The only way for us to relocate the facility is to cannibalize another necessary facility, which is not a good outcome. So the damage being done to what the code is seeking to protect here is, I would argue, nil to almost nil. And we are preserving a historic and extremely necessary facility for this college. So I think when you look at the substantial justice peg, we meet that one a whole lot. I hope that we believe we've clearly demonstrated that there's a hardship here, and that this is, as you can tell, has been thought about a lot, and we've spent a lot of time and effort making sure that we are asking for the minimum required to get this done. We do have civil engineers and LAs and presidents of the university or the college here for questions, so go ahead. I'll field what I can, and you can hear how much Tim knows about it. So,
All right. Thank you. Are there any questions from the board for the applicant?
I have one small question. I was reading the agency memo, and I stumbled across the Southwest Florida Water Management District Resource Regulation Division requesting a minimum 15-foot, average 25-foot wetland conservation area setback. Does that ring a bell? Did they drop that request, or what happened there? It's on page 53 of 60.
Yeah, I think regarding, and I'm going back, recollection, that would be for, they view this as more of a retrofit. It's an existing facility. But they indicated that no mitigation would be required. If we were proposing something new, they would view it differently.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question, something that I asked earlier, which hopefully I can get some clarification. What exactly material is going to be used to cover the ground, the pervious turf? Impervious. Sorry, these are new words to me.
Full disclosure, we haven't gotten all that far yet because we've been waiting for this, but synthetic turf, generally speaking, for athletic uses or for these kinds of uses is a, polyethylene or polypropylene or something material. It comes as a backed kind of carpet, essentially about that long, or depending on what you're doing. It's infilled with whatever is the suitable thing. The volleyball court there is that material infilled with sand. And so the reason it's become so popular is obviously maintenance, but also it has the ability to take a tremendous amount of water and you can walk on it immediately.
I do have a question though, because part of the presentation mentioned, is the lack of bugs on the turf.
Yeah.
In the event that this is that this can bear water and water can go through it, What is the reason, is there any knowledge why the bugs are staying off this turf? Is it like harmful to them or something, or?
I would be guessing if no, I don't know. It's, I guess they can't build their houses in it. And, but
Okay.
all I know is the student feedback says we like it because the bugs don't crawl on us. So,
All right, do you have a on hand, I know that using the exact material isn't part of the request that you've made, but do you have, for example, a material in mind that you know water can drain through at a certain speed that you have available to say you'd build the ground out of today?
well, all those systems vary a bit. And they all, when we are doing it, for instance, neither here nor there, when we're doing athletic fields, we require it to drain 15 inches an hour. I think this would probably drain less than that, just because we're not building an athletic field. But that's still a tremendous amount of infiltration.
Okay, you're a colleague that has a,
I think, want me to add to that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
We just, on the, artificial turf is recognized by many stormwater manuals, like Pinellas County's Green Infrastructure Manual recognizes artificial turf as a green infrastructure, low impact development, BMP or best management practice. It is widely accepted, and quite frankly, a lot of college baseball stadiums have gone this way. If you watch the College World Series, it's going on tonight. Even USF's, we just replaced their field with artificial turf, and because they had a lot of ponding issues and maintenance issues, and it's widely accepted.
I do have a question though. In the event, hypothetically, this is just, it's a hypothetical question. In the event that the board were to approve your design, but add a term about inches per hour drained as part of it, would that be something you would be willing to accept?
Yeah, if it's within that tolerance of standard practice, certainly, yeah.
Okay, that's part of why I was inching towards if you had a material in mind that, because I was.
What's the name of the turf we used?
I cannot remember. That's been
About up with USF.
It's a field turf.
Yeah, what was the name of the vendor?
Okay, do you have a range, like is it 10 inches to 15 inches, or are they?
Yeah, I would say within that range of 10 to 15 inches per hour.
Okay, so if hypothetically the board were to, if we were to grant your variance, but we were to add that it has to drain at least 10 inches per hour, is that something that you guys would probably be willing to accept, or?
Yeah, if you give me a few minutes to look at that or think on that, I think I could answer that. But I think it might be better to word it if it's within standard regulatory criteria.
It's just kind of like whenever you give the procedure, that's where my brain was going when I was watching the way it was set up to make sure about like, just something that I would like is making sure the water was actually being drained through that. All right, are there any more questions?
Chair, I have a question for you, if that's okay. Is your concern that once they have built the amphitheater, they will then subsequently make more surface impervious so that you're adding this drainage requirement so that they don't cement everything up, or what's the rationale?
Partially also just for protecting we're encroaching into the river territory. For someone who doesn't have a science background, is more or less making sure that that it was, the ground was not being messed with, I guess.
Maybe instead of stipulating a specific drainage requirement, given that technology also changes over time, maybe a phrasing sort of like the best possible drainage given the technical and economic possibilities at any given time should always be.
I think that's really open, and I don't know about that.
Well, and
I have to agree to
if I could add, we're also going to be limited by whatever the native soil is. That sometimes is actually the limiting factor on these systems.
Yeah.
What does the soil take? So I can put 20 inches an hour in it. If it takes 5, then.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you could be more general, I think that would be, if I could.
Well, I'm asking Tim a question on the mic without knowing the answer, which is not what I'm supposed to do, but the riverbank only takes so much water. I mean, to get back to his point, I hear you aiming towards something where you want it to function the way it would if there was nothing there at all. And I think that when you hear 15, I'm not a science guy either, I'm a caveman lawyer, but I don't think that the riverbank takes 15, and, I think that drains better. It's like if you go to the golf courses and they've spent all this time layering and layering and layering and the water just disappears. not the way the riverbank's gonna work. So,
Certainly, it will be more, much more pervious than a concrete sidewalk, which has zero permeability. It will go down rather than going off. And that's the whole point. So that's what I would say about it.
I have one more stupid question for you. Presumably, a lot of spectators will be gathering at various points in time at the amphitheater. Perhaps even people will be going there to have lunch or snacks. Is there any sort of physical barrier to prevent trash from being swept into the river from the seating area?
I don't think there's one currently. I mean, there is a higher brush along the river, I think, but other than just good policing and behavior. Trash cans, yes. So please behave and throw your garbage away.
Can't always rely on students, you know,
What?
to clean up after themselves.
I know.
Okay.
All right.
Are there any more questions from the to the applicant from the board? Okay. Are there any other persons wishing to be heard on this matter? Okay. Well, the applicant, you have the final word. If anybody wants to make a conclusory statement of some sort, I know that we didn't have any public speeches on this.
yeah, I mean, Clayton Bricklemeyer again, just to say, you know, I think we've met the burden. You know, the hardship is clear, and we would ask for your approval. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. If there are no further comments from the board on variance BA 3222, I hereby close the public hearing and the board may discuss the application. All right. So, who has any thoughts? What are you thinking, Eric?
Why you start with me? Go to the other end of the
I
table.
think they made their case very clear. I
Okay.
think it was very thorough, and the staff report findings are correct, so
Okay.
no questions for me. It's a very straightforward project.
They're hoping it's not in place.
Yeah, they're making
Yeah.
it better
They're
than,
making it better than what it
and
was,
safer than what it is
Yeah.
right currently, and cleaning
Okay.
it up.
using the restrictions they have.
I think my biggest frustration is I'd like to see I'd like to see them exempted from the setback requirements. So in terms of that zoning area, you know, it just seems really impracticable, especially when and I appreciated the I guess that was a sort of a topographical blueprint where it showed the 200-foot setback extending into the dining hall and a bunch of other I mean, it's clearly not practicable for that space. And we've been in this situation before where for example, the infamous side yard pool, right, where we were all just kind of frustrated with the situation, but then we kicked it up to council because we thought that the rules should really be different potentially for those kinds of projects. And we're in that situation here too. So in a sense, that is exactly what a variance is for, but in a sense, it's also not what a variance is for. It's what a legislative change would be for. So personally, I thought the presentation was really good. I also think the project is really good. But I am frustrated in being in the position to have to go in a direction of approving this when it's so clearly in contravention of these setback requirements. Now, I understand the topographical issues are there, the zoning issues are there. So it's a tough spot, but I think on the whole, you have to look at it in terms of the overall zoning is one which is supposed to promote this college. It's an educational public use. The zoning itself says that the use is supposed to be achieved in an economical and reasonable way. And it's just that Florida College has been let down by these setback requirements. in a way that we probably as a board have been let down by them as well in this particular case. But if we were to apply all of these setback requirements rigorously to Florida College, they would lose what looked to me about 15 to 20% of their space. Or yeah, so I mean, it just seems so absurd to draw a line in the sand over the amphitheater when it affects, 30 to 40% of their campus. So, I mean, I'm inclined to go along with you, Tony and Stephanie, but I also think that that setback requirement for that area really needs to be revisited, because they don't have a going concern if they have to come here every time they try to do something in that setback and it's up for grabs. So,
Well, but technically, we can't constitutionally make it, like, they're not allowed to make a law that only applies to them. So those aren't, but so they have to technically make a variance every time. We'd have, like, the city can't.
The city
Perm-
would change their setback requirements.
They could for everybody, they can't do it just for one school.
well, there's
though.
only, as far as I'm aware, one educational public use zone in Temple Terrace.
Oh.
So
By use.
they occupy that zone.
So, all right, so,
But that's
Consider-
not for us to decide. That's
no,
for
I
the
know,
city.
that does make an interesting point, though, for,
One major point here, though, is they're not creating something new. This is not new. It's already there, and
No, we have to show our bylaws.
oh, sorry. This isn't new. This is something they're rebuilding to make better. They're not, they're not asking, hey, let's take up river space and setbacks of an area that's never been utilized before. This has been utilized for years and years and years, and right now it's in disarray. And it's almost a hazard, I would assume, if any student goes near it. So just to be able to reuse the space in a more functional way and in a better way, they're doing the best they can. I think we have to look at it from that perspective as well versus, hey, we want to build an amphitheater with this 8-foot setback. They're not asking that. They're asking to repair something that's broken.
yeah. No, I know, I definitely can see that, it's a really awesome design, just it's a tough situation that, but okay. If anybody has a motion,
Longworth, could I make a comment? Do you mind? So we do have different setbacks for residential properties along the river. So if it's a residential property platted prior to 1987, it's a 20-foot rear setback or 20-foot setback on the river. If it's after 87, it's a 25-foot setback along the river. So this 50-foot and 200-foot only applies to non-residential properties along the river. And there are very few of those along the river. I can think of the city park and the college.
Yeah.
What
So
would be-
by making this decision, we're basically adjudicating that issue, as it were, until the dining hall or the parking lot needs something. So
yeah. Well, it does make an interesting point about if the law should be changed for zoning for that educational use. But, okay, if anybody has a motion on this,
And you will need to make findings of fact, and that you don't like the current law is not an acceptable finding of fact. You have to operate, that's why we're here, that is the setback, and that is what the city tries to enforce. You need to look at the criteria that are listed here in the staff report and make findings of fact with regard to those things. The fact that they are making something that existed better is not, really not relevant. So you have to look at the criteria for a variance.
yeah, so yeah, exactly. So in terms of what exactly the hardship is, I kind of pieced it together throughout the evening, but the smoking gun is still kind of missing for me. But I can get there because we have a specific kind of zone, E1. This is for public educational use, and in a similar way that we've had lots that were zoned, for example, for residential use, we had to grant a variance so that a house could be built on that lot in a way that made it usable. And so this is, to me, a similar situation because we have an E1 zoned area, and if we were to strictly apply exactly what we're being asked to apply, which is this 200-foot setback, the 50-foot wetland setback, we'd end up with a similar restriction of the use of that space that would make it impracticable. In the same way that residential lots that we've looked at previously, we've granted variances for the same reason. So that's where I see the hardship on this one.
And is this the minimum variance required to make
I'm
reasonable
caught up a little
use
bit
of-
about this Southwest Florida Water Management District. So they did write in the meeting notes that they were going to defer to Temple Terrace, but I do see in here that they were saying maintain minimum 15-foot, average 25-foot wetland conservation area setback or address secondary impact. So I don't know what secondary impacts are. They don't really go into detail on that, but if I were to guess, it would probably be the drainage issues. So I'm generously interpreting what's been presented so far, then they've addressed these secondary impacts. So perhaps that's the or, so we can look past that one. Yep.
Okay, I'm just probably gonna.
Byron, where do you come down on this?
My only thing is though, is that I may hold the vote hostage based upon just the drainage of the area, making sure that the turf is.
So why don't you make the
impervious.
motion because you had a specific idea about the drainage? I don't know how to say that for you, so.
All right, okay, I motion, okay, so before we can actually add that though, we have to ask I have to ask the city, in the event that we were to motion to require you to use impervious, or I believe the word is pervious turf on the ground so the water can drain through, is that something that you would accept as part of this variance?
It's going to depend on the wording. The spirit of that, absolutely, yeah, that's our intention. So
Okay.
it depends on how it's worded.
I mean,
Can you say what it is that you would probably accept, just because?
The use of, the maximal use of pervious surface, something along those lines, which is what we're intending to do.
You don't want to tie their hands too much because that's just construction. You start going and then you got to adjust to what you find on the ground. And then you have to make adjustments on the fly. That's just how it is on those projects. So, I mean, personally, I think, Tony, Stephanie, I think we would probably, the three of us, get there without the drainage requirement because I think the drainage stuff is
It's required,
pretty clear, so.
Okay.
building departments and the zoning codes.
All right, well, if,
Personally, I'm more worried about trash getting into the river, but, I'll take them on their word for that as being good citizens.
all right,
Next to the campus, it's a pretty clean campus.
Yeah, I know,
Okay, well,
I've been there,
Lots of trash cans and recycle bin.
exactly.
all right. Well, in that case then, if you had the motion ready, then,
Okay, so, I hope I do this right, I don't have any template here, so I will make a motion to approve a variance for a 8-foot wetland and river setback for variance application BA 23-02. Property address 119 Glen Arven Avenue for Florida College. Do I need to go into details about the nature of the project, or?
I would think you would need to at least say
Hardships.
the hardship has been demonstrated or something along those.
Yeah, and on account of the hardship being demonstrated, that a strict application of the wetland and river setbacks would eliminate the use of 40%, roughly 40% of the campus's total area and make the operation of a educational institute impossible, which is the specific zoned use for that area.
A second.
all right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it is approved.
Thank you.
All right,
I'm gonna have this caramel candy now. Oh, we're not done yet, are we?
all right, so for the other business, is there any new matter that any board member would like to raise?
Nope.
Is there any old business, their old business to be brought before the board? Okay, the next meeting of the Board of Adjustment will be on July 27th, 2023 at 6 PM if needed.
Yes, sir. At this time, we have no petitions for that meeting submitted to the City Community Development Department.
Okay.
So there will be no meeting in July.
There will be.
Will not be a meeting, ma'am, in July.
Okay. If you change your mind, I might not be able to come.
Well, they've passed.
It's past the due, it's
past the due
past
date.
the due date, yeah.
I would like to make one comment, though. Starting at all the other meetings, I'm going to make a 3 or 4 binder, binder and have those available with all the hard copies that have been submitted, so you can bring those to the meeting and read from them, and you won't have to worry about going on computers or anything like that.
Yeah. We had copies previously at the,
Yeah, we used to have them printed and laid out.
I will have them printed in a
Okay.
3-ring binder for y'all, available a week or so before the meeting.
all right, sounds good.
Thank you.
All right,
Ben, sorry I called you Gus earlier. Apologize.
I've been called far worse.
is there a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Nay.
Crush it.